Hi, everybody. This is an opportunity for Carolyn and I to just kind of walk through how a team discussion might look. As we initially worked with some consultants, there was concern over the formality of this process. And so we are engaging in this simply to kind of show you how it can be a dialogue with team members, and that it really is just an opportunity to go through and have a discussion about ratings and what kind of information you can gather about the why of the issues that are coming up. So we have already been through looking at the survey data that was collected across the board so that anyone not at this team meeting was able to contribute and make sure that the team that's now around the table feels like it accurately reflects what's happening in their building or in their grade level. And we have looked at the initial screening data as part of our problem identification for what's going on. So Carolyn is going to represent a whole team. So she's multiple people in the room representing the entire grade level team that we're meeting with in this case. And I'm going to be the consultant. And we're just going to kind of work through the first sections of questions in tier one to show you how this dialogue might sound. So, all right, Carolyn and team, it's so great that you are here today and we're able to walk through these initial questions. So we're going to get started with the assessment section. We have looked at some of the assessment slides and come together around a shared understanding of what needs to happen around assessment. So let's dig in. When we look at our first question in screening, we have already looked at your guys' data that we just reviewed, and we know that there's some work to do, right? With 58% of kids on track, that's not where we want to be. So are we all in agreement that a score of 1 makes sense there, and that we now want to dig into some questions as to why and how we could look at improving that?
Yeah, most definitely.
All right, perfect. So as we talked about, I collected your recent Acadience data before we met. We reviewed it. Because I'm familiar with Acadience, I know these measures are covered. They have strong technical adequacy. They're reliable and valid. I've marked a few of these as strengths already just to keep us moving through the process. So I 1 and 2, I went ahead and marked as 3s, meaning those are items that are on track. We don't need to worry about the screening measure you have. So take a look at what items I've marked 1 and 2 with the 3s and see if you would agree with that or if you have any questions.
Yeah, no, I think that looks good. Yeah, we really worked hard to make sure we put a good screening measure in place. So yeah, that looks good to me.
Awesome. So moving on to number 3 then, are there other assessments you guys are using as well as Acadience in this particular case?
Yeah, we're also told that we have to use MAP.
Okay, and what does MAP tell you? How do you use that assessment?
So MAP's interesting. So when I administer the MAP assessment and I take a look at the results that I get, I can see who's made growth, but I'm really not sure what else I'm supposed to look at or I'm supposed to do with the information. And then, I'm told I'm supposed to adjust my instruction based on the components that come out of the report, but I'm not exactly sure what those components are and how I'm supposed to adjust my instruction accordingly.
Got it. Okay, so you have it, but it's not something you're using for a lot of other information.
Yeah.
So
I feel like I get a lot more information out of my Acadience data. I mean, I can really see that those components of, they can segment sounds and words, or I get a percentage of oral reading fluency, so I know how accurate they are. So I tend to be able to really see how my students are doing and what I potentially could work on, rather than the other assessment that just gives me a growth report, something like that.
got it. So I went ahead and marked that as a 2, just as maybe something to revisit. Is it something that's needed? And it might be for other district or state requirements. It's not a major on fire situation where you're, assessing so much you don't have enough time for instruction, but it doesn't sound like maybe it's something that's providing a whole lot of useful information.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. So can you tell me a little bit about what do you do after you get this information? How do you use the information you have?
So we have a team meeting. So after every screening period, like benchmarking period, we have a team meeting and we take a look at our screening data. And then we use that screening data to check our small groups and see who might need tier 2 interventions.
Okay. And how do you analyze those data?
So we really just look at who's in blue or green, yellow, and red. And then if you're in yellow, you get some interventions. And if you are in red, you get a lot of interventions.
Okay. Okay, so it sounds like you have team meetings, which is a good start, but that maybe there might be a need to talk a little bit more about how you are grouping students and how you're using that information. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to go ahead and mark that as a 2, just as something we might want to come back to.
Yep.
Is that all right?
Yep, that
Okay.
sounds great.
All right. What about professional development that you had around these different screeners? What about training? Have you all been given a training on Acadience assessment, interpretation, kind of all those pieces?
Yeah, so when we first brought in Acadience as our screener, we were all trained, but that was, gosh, I want to say that was maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And we had somebody come train us who was a mentor or somebody. Like, so we had an official training, but it's probably been about 2 or 3 years.
And have you had any refresher trainings or any opportunity to check
No,
in?
we all kind of felt like once you know how to do it, we didn't need anything else.
Okay. Are you comfortable if I mark that as a 2, just in case it's something we want to come back to refresh or see if there's anything that might be needed there?
I think that might be a good idea because, sometimes I forget. I got to go back to the manual and see. So yeah, that might be, yeah, we can go back and revisit that. That's good.
All right. And what about new staff? Have they had any opportunity for training then?
No, you know what? Now that I think about it, we do have a new kindergarten teacher. So I think one of the other kindergarten teachers trained her how to do it. And
Okay.
she also, so there's the new teacher, but there's also the new kindergarten aide. And I think someone just showed her how to do it, but they didn't get any kind of they didn't have the same training as we did. So no one came to them. So I think somebody just kind of trained them on the fly.
Okay. So 1, 2, what are you thinking there in terms of kind of urgency of need around that piece?
Well, I guess if we're looking that all staff have been trained and there's a plan for supporting new staff, I don't think that's a 3. It's probably a 2, right? Because we need to put something in place to think about if we get new teachers, how to make sure that they have that base level of understanding of how to administer the assessment.
I would agree with that. It sounds like something happened incidentally, but maybe that's something that could be firmed up.
Yeah.
A little bit. All right. And since I saw from the data you guys sent me an electronic report that you sent, you guys do have an electronic data system. So that's an easy one. You have easy access to the data. So that's kind of an easy 3, which is nice to be able to put down. Do you enter your own data?
So everyone who does progress monitoring, so I do my own progress monitoring, so I enter that data into the system, but we have an assessment team that kind of sweeps in and assesses everybody at each grade level. Classroom teachers don't do their own assessing. So we have assessment team, and the assessment team takes all that data and enters it in for the benchmark assessments. But then if you progress monitor students, you enter your own progress monitoring in.
Got it. Perfect. So you know how to get it into the system and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Talk to me about your system and the assessment team. How do you know when to collect data and who's collecting it?
So we have this assessment team. It's comprised of Sally, our reading specialist. Tia is our school psychologist. There's an SLP and a classroom aide who are on our assessment team. And they create a schedule. So to let us know when they're going to be assessing our grade level. And, sometimes they try to narrow it down to class, but mostly by grade level. And then that happens for each benchmarking period. So what happens is they set this. So let's say they're going to do, they want to get kindergarten out of the way. So they'll let us know that Tuesday, starting at 9:00, they're going to start coming around to all the kindergarten classrooms. They have class list and they just start pulling kids out into a quiet place in the hallway. And then as soon as they're finished with one student, that kid comes back in, taps another child on the shoulder, says, hey, come back out again. So the kids are pretty used to, 3 times a year coming in and out to do that. And then if we have a new student come into the school, that team is charged with making sure that they either have an assessment from if they're within the district, or if they need an assessment, they pull them real quick and do that for us.
So it sounds like you guys feel like you have a good plan there. I mean, that sounds really solid in terms of collecting benchmark data for everyone. So I would be inclined to rate that a 3. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's been pretty efficient. It's really not much of a disruption to my class. And once I prime the kids that it's going to happen, they that's going to happen. So.
Okay. Perfect. And in terms of this next item, you actually covered this already when we were talking before, that you guys do meet 3 times a year. You use the data to sort students. We ranked above that. We may need to alter that a little bit in terms of how you're thinking about that data, but you are meeting, and that's part of the schedule. So again, I would rate that as a 3, as something we've already been able to cover. So that's great. Are all students screened, including students in special education and English language learners?
Yes, every student.
Okay, perfect. And the final question in the assessment section, when you meet in your team meetings that you mentioned, do you have criteria that help you look efficiently to be able to make decisions about who needs what? We often call them decision rules, but they're guidelines, since we know by the time we sit down, we probably have 30 minutes at best. So do you have some guidelines to help you be able to efficiently figure out who do we need to look at, who do we need to make decisions for, and how are we doing overall?
So I'm not really sure. We just kind of look at the class list of students and how they performed at the benchmark, and we just kind of compare them to each other to decide who kind of needs more than another student.
Gotcha. Did you know that actually the Acadian system can use the benchmark data and provide you with suggested groupings?
No, I didn't know that. We just kind of rank them, right? Like from lowest, what's it called, the composite score, lowest composite score to the highest composite score, and then I don't know, kind of make necessary adjustments to the groups.
Okay. If it's all right, I'm going to go ahead and mark that as a 1, as an area we might want to come back to. I think that's great information to know. And it might be an important area to look at in terms of the structure for reviewing data and how we might be able to be more targeted in making decisions for students. So that's something we could come back to and talk about later, if that's all right.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Awesome, team. We're moving forward. So, side note for those listening, depending on the time you have, that might be the section that you're able to accomplish in a meeting, or you might be able to continue through more sections. We've had meetings that are after school and you have 45 minutes and this is chunked into different components. We've had half days with teams in which we're working through the entire document. So in this particular meeting, we're going to keep plugging forward because Carolyn and her team are gung-ho and ready to go. So now we're going to start to talk about instructional supports a little bit, and the kind of instruction and curricula that are happening in the classroom. So let's dig into content. We would start with our review of slides to look at the different content areas, make sure we're all on the same page around what we mean by phonemic awareness and phonemic awareness instruction, followed by phonics, fluency, and thinking about important components of instructional delivery. Once we've looked at those slides, then we're going to dig into content. So looking at the instructional tools and information that you sent ahead of time and that we can review together today, you use Reach Higher from National Geographic as your core, with Heggerty and 6-Minute Solution and Newsela as supplements. Is that accurate in terms of kind of an overview of what's in the classrooms?
Yep.
All right. So let's talk about phonemic awareness first in the broader category of phonological awareness. Heggerty definitely provides a strong foundation for phonemic awareness practice. If anything, it's currently questioned for focusing on too many skills at once, but it definitely pushes a phonemic awareness skill focus. Tell me about how you use it, how it's going, how long you spend on it every day, just a little bit more information on how it looks in the classroom.
Yeah, so we start each of our reading blocks using Heggerty. The kids really seem to like it. They're doing great. They can do, a lot of good things with the tasks. They sometimes struggle with the rhyming piece of it, which is kind of interesting, but they really do. They like the hand movements. They like the roller coaster. They like the chopping of the sound. So it's just kind of a nice kind of easing into the literacy block for the day.
Okay. And how long do you spend on it every day?
About 10, 15 minutes. It depends on the day. And sometimes it depends on how focused the kids are.
All right. Yeah, that sounds pretty strong in terms of just making sure that you're giving that approximately 10 minutes of focus a day to phonemic awareness. So I would go ahead and rate that a 3 if you guys are comfortable with that in terms of being a strong piece in place in your classroom.
Okay.
All right. In terms of phonics, I'm going to be honest, I have some concerns about Reach Higher. It doesn't have the strongest structured phonics component. It's more of incidental. Can you talk to me about what you see and how it looks when you look at a lesson?
So it's interesting that you bring that up, and I'm going to have to I guess I'm tending to agree with you. It seems really focused on comprehension strategies. It has, nice pictures and stories, and the kids really like that. There's a little bit of phonics, but looking at the lesson, for an example, it's 8 different blends that they introduced in the lesson. So that seems like a lot to do in one particular time. It asks the students to listen for the blends, find and blend the words. They got to read the words in partners. They have to match the beginning blending sounds. So it's a lot of activities. And I guess that's, as I reflect on this, that's really what it is. It's a lot of activities, not so much teaching. And it kind of goes through it really quickly. So some of the blends that they're asked to, like in this particular lesson, some of the blends that they're asked to take a look at, they do come up later in the lesson, but it's pretty rare if you see the same thing occurring over and over and over again. I think we're realizing it's not very strong in the phonics component. We've tried finding some other resources. My colleague has an account with Teacher Pay Teacher, so we've looked on there, kind of add in some phonics worksheets and extra practice. I have found some extra homework sheets on blends, but as far as the program itself, it just doesn't seem to have as much of what we need with a phonics focus.
Okay. Well, and since we looked at your benchmark scores and phonics showed up as a weakness there, what you're saying is kind of confirmed that maybe the core isn't as supportive as it needs to be in this area. So I definitely think this is an area we probably want to revisit. Are you all comfortable with a 1 for this area, just so we make sure we come back and really have a discussion about what we can do to strengthen that, especially for K1, where it's such an incredibly important focus?
Yeah, I think one's a good thing to take a look at.
Okay, I would agree. That's an area to revisit. How about fluency practice?
So there's lots of opportunities to read together. There's work on reading comprehension. So, kids are building fluency. They're asked to do a high volume of reading, but we didn't, even with all of that, we didn't feel that was enough. So that's where we brought in some 6-minute solutions with partner reading together. We have those cold reads on Monday, hot reads on Friday, and then they are able to track their growth over the week. And that's helped a lot.
Okay. So, it sounds like you guys noticed that weakness and you've already worked to address it. 2, 3, is that something that's completely solved? Is it a concern that you have to supplement it? Should we go with a 2.5, something in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Are we able to go with the 2.5? It's definitely not a 3, and I don't think it's a 1, but somewhere kind of in the middle there, maybe 2,
yeah.
2.5. Okay.
Luckily, this is in our control, so we can do that. All right. The last question I had in this section is just around foundational reading. Obviously, that's part of phonics because there's that reciprocal skill of decoding, which is the reading piece, and encoding, which is the spelling of words. We also know that handwriting practice is really important early to improve those early literacy skills, critical for more advanced writing. I'm just curious what you would say about writing instruction when we think about that phonics piece too.
So there's a little bit of a focus on spelling and some grammar that I've noticed. Like in this lesson that I brought, they're adding so this lesson's all about adding like an S or an ES to the ends of words for plurals and then identifying nouns. Okay. Then they have to write a practice sentence using a plural that relates to the story that we've just read. This one happens to be about, families helping each other. But, as I really look through some of these lessons, often students just kind of have to fill in a single word, like in a sentence frame. So they're not really like constructing their own, developing their own sentence, or they might have to write a sentence and share it with a partner. But, kind of beyond that, most of the writing really focuses on a writing process. Like we're going to create, and then we're going to draft, and then we're going to edit. I don't remember seeing it, and we've taught this now for about 1.5 years. There's really not any actual handwriting practice. Like I've never seen like worksheets or anything like that teaches the kids how to, write a particular letter.
Okay. All right. Do you see any connection between the writing part and the phonics part that you would be teaching in a particular day?
I guess I never really thought about it. It's actually in a separate part. It's in a separate section of the manual. So it's kind of separate. I don't know. There's no connection between the writing and the phonics.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. And again, coming back to then phonics from both those perspectives, I think would make a lot of sense. So, okay, a few other details to consider here in this last section around instructional delivery that we want to look at. Looking at your core program Retire, is there a key scope and sequence?
Yes, it does show progress for phonics skills and language skills.
Okay. And do you see the skills progress from easier to more difficult for your kids in line with what we know from the science of reading? I know you guys have done some training around that.
So I'm really not sure. It kind of does, but some of the things kind of seem out of sync, out of whack. Like they tend to focus on a lot of different blends. And I saw in one scope and sequence that you should actually do like short vowels and maybe some digraphs. So there are some little things that kind of seem a little out of whack, but I guess I'd have to compare it to a preferred scope and sequence to see where it falls.
Okay. How systematic and explicit do you find the instruction? Do you find you're giving a lot of models and then having a lot of opportunity to work with students, provide explicit feedback to them, give cumulative review?
Not really. We cover a lot, but it definitely moves on pretty quickly. And as I think the group mentioned before, we kind of have to supplement with some of with some other worksheets and things to practice reading skills, because it just seems to keep moving and moving and moving without actual, like, here's what I want you to do with your students and here's what I want you to look for. And there's definitely not enough practice, which is why we brought in some of those other worksheets. But, you know, what we found, and we've talked about this all the time, we seem to be constantly trying to find other things, like we're searching and printing and, you know, using up all of our paper reams and things like that, because it just doesn't, we just need to be practicing more with the kids. There are some, they call them decodables. They're mostly decodables, and they have a reader feature to kind of help the students.
Okay. What about a correction plan for when students make errors? Do you have anything written in there that helps you know how to correct them to be able to get them on the right track?
I'm not really sure what you mean by that. Like when kids make an error, I just correct them, but I haven't seen any suggestions for how to do that.
Okay. I'm definitely hearing you say maybe there's some pieces we might want to review in here to make sure you guys have the strong resource you need to be able to provide the instruction. Are you getting a lesson a day done or whatever is indicated by the program?
We follow our pacing, but I'm not sure the kids are always getting the reading practice that they need. I mean, so we're keeping on pace. We're not behind.
Okay. So I'm inclined to give this section a 1 just to make sure it's something we come back and revisit together, if that makes sense to you guys, just from the perspective of hearing you say that there is a scope and sequence, but now that you've got more information, you're not sure how well it aligns to what would make sense in terms of skill development, easier to harder, order in which it would make sense to be introducing new skills to students. So that might be a piece worth revisiting, as well as kind of the number of opportunities kids have for practice and whether it's enough, because I'm hearing you say you guys are spending a lot of time looking for other materials to supplement, which obviously we all do as good teachers, right? But you want to have a program that provides you with that strong foundation and most of what you need so that you can feel confident your kids are getting what they need. So would that be fair to rate that as a 1, as something to come back to, as a possible area that might be contributing to some of that lower data we were looking at the beginning?
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay. All right. And the last part of this first section around word recognition is just looking at responsiveness to student needs. And again, this kind of goes back to looking at the data. So when we looked at your screening benchmark data, it indicated 58% of kids are on track at this point in the year. How do you feel about your students and how they're doing overall in Tier 1?
Well, I mean, 58%, I think we could be doing better. And if I go back up and I look at the nonsense word fluency and the accuracy scores, that really makes me think that some of our kids do need more, especially in phonics, because aren't nonsense word fluency just like short vowels and kind of the consonant sounds?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So maybe keeping that a 1, just kind of consistent. I mean, I think all of this kind of comes together in terms of saying, when we look at this information, The data are lower in phonics. To your point, that was a great idea to go back and look at nonsense word fluency in particular. There's some weakness there. And then when we look at the program, that's where we're saying, gosh, that might need to be a stronger component, both in terms of content and in terms of instructional design. And so the ones here will allow us to remember what we want to come back to and really have more in-depth discussion about later, and potentially look at making some changes to improve upon student outcomes. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.